A nuclear pause. North Korea's leader announces the suspension of all missile tests ahead of historic talks with South Korea and the U.S. What's brought about this dramatic shift, and is Kim Jong-un serious about peace? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Thibault. After a series of missile tests that kept the world on edge, North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un has announced he's suspending all missile tests and shutting down a nuclear test site. The surprise announcement comes ahead of two important summits with South Korea and the United States. Both countries have been pushing North Korea to denuclearize. U.S. President Donald Trump described this latest move as a positive step. But is it a real change in Pyongyang's policy? We'll get to our guests in just a moment. But first, Kathy Novak has this report from South Korea's capital, Seoul.
North Korea regularly tested increasingly threatening ballistic missiles last year, including weapons that could have the range to hit the United States. In September, it conducted its most powerful nuclear bomb test. Now, North Korea says those tests are over.
We will discontinue nuclear testing and intercontinental ballistic rocket test firing from April the 21st. The northern nuclear test ground of the DPRK will also be dismantled to transparently guarantee the discontinuance of nuclear testing.
It's welcome news for the U.S. president, who's planning to meet North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un within weeks. Donald Trump tweeted, North Korea has agreed to suspend all nuclear tests and close up a major test site. This is very good news for North Korea and the world. Big progress. Look forward to our summit. State media says Kim Jong-un made the announcement as he chaired a meeting of the Workers' Party's Central Committee, a gathering to rubber-stamp the supreme leader's decisions. It was at a similar meeting 5 years ago that Kim unveiled his signature policy to prioritize the development of nuclear weapons and the economy. The message from the leader now is that weapons program development is complete, and the focus will shift to the economy, currently under pressure from a U.S.-led sanctions campaign.
Kim Jong-un clarified that now that the DPRK's position as a world-level politico-ideological and military power has been successfully established, it is the strategic line of the Workers' Party to concentrate all efforts of the whole party and country on the socialist economic construction.
Kim is apparently seeking to cement his position on the world stage. Following his meeting in Beijing last month with China's President Xi Jinping, talks with CIA Director Mike Pompeo in Pyongyang, and ahead of a historic summit with South Korea's President Moon Jae-in on Friday. South Korea welcomed the announcement, calling North Korea's decision meaningful progress for the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. The president's office said it will contribute to creating a positive environment for the success of the upcoming inter-Korean and U.S.-North Korea summits. China has also welcomed the announcement, while Japan's prime minister was more cautious.
North Korea's announcement is forward motion that I'd like to welcome. But what's important is that this motion leads to complete, verifiable and irreversible dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear and missile programs.
North Korea's promise to stop weapons testing didn't go that far. It pledged to never use nuclear weapons unless there are nuclear threats and nuclear provocations against it. Kathy Novak, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
Well, the pledge to stop missile testing comes after a busy year of launches by North Korea. In 2017, there were 23 in total. Last September, North Korea fired a ballistic missile over Japan. Its flight distance was 3,700 kilometers, which put the U.S. territory of Guam under threat. A few days later, speaking at the UN, the U.S. president called Kim Jong-un a rocket man on a suicide mission, and he warned the U.S. may have to totally destroy North Korea. But then a breakthrough came on the diplomatic front. In February, athletes from North and South Korea marched under a unified flag at the Winter Olympics. And a month later, South Korea announced Pyongyang was ready for talks with the U.S. Donald Trump accepted the invitation within 2 days. Weeks later, Kim made his first overseas visit to China Following a meeting with North Korea's strongest ally, there were more conciliatory gestures. And Trump this week confirmed his administration has been in direct touch with Pyongyang. A historic meeting is expected to take place in late May or early June. Well, let's bring in our panel for today's Inside Story. From Busan in South Korea, Robert Kelly, Professor of Political Science and Diplomacy at Pusan National University. In Singapore, Garham Ong-Webb, a research fellow at Nanyang Technological University. And in Washington, D.C., Mark Fitzpatrick, a 26-year veteran of the U.S. State Department, where he specialized in non-proliferation. Gentlemen, thank you all for being with us on Inside Story. Robert Kelly, is this, in your view, a genuine step forward by North Korea or a negotiating tactic ahead of the summit with South Korea and the U.S.?
I think it's a step forward. It's a smaller one, though, than I think maybe many people want to find it to be. Broadly, though, I think the news reaction today globally and in South Korea has been properly restrained, right? Cautious optimism. It's good the North Koreans are saying these things. It's certainly better than we were 4 months or 6 months ago. The real issue, of course, will be verification, right? The North Koreans may say they're going to shut these things down and close them down and the rest of it. But at this point, after 30 years of negotiating with North Korea, nobody's going to believe them until we can get international inspectors and their cameras and stuff like that. And the big question with the North Koreans always is, will they allow that kind of stuff? Traditionally, they've been quite hostile to it. So maybe this is sort of an early bid to kind of help frame the upcoming summits. But, you know, it's a positive, if small, step.
Garham Ong-Webb in Singapore, your thoughts. The big question, of course, now is why is North Korea acting in this way now, not just on nuclear and missile tests, but in other areas too, agreeing to drop its objections, for instance, on U.S. South Korean military exercises and so on. Why do you think this is happening now?
Well, it's very likely that Kim Jong-un doesn't want to see anything derailing the prospects for a meeting between himself and President Donald Trump in May or June. And he's just setting the path for that, for success, essentially. What we've been seeing over the last few weeks, in my assessment, just a series of carrots to make sure that things stay on track. That, as we know, President Trump has the wherewithal to actually decline a meeting from now until it may happen. And Kim Jong-un is just not taking chances on that and trying to ensure that that meeting does happen because it's a very important objective for him.
But there are those, as you know, who see this perhaps as something more sinister, Graham. I mean, that this could perhaps signal that North Korea has made enough progress with its nuclear weapons program that they've moved on to a next phase, for instance.
Very likely. I concur with Professor Kelly's assessments he's made that the North Korea's nuclear weapons program is more mature than many of us think. Yes, barring a final few tests that many technical experts say that North Korea ought to go through to completely verify the viability and robustness of its nuclear weapons capability. North Korea, under Kim Jong-un's charge, over the last few years have gone in leaps and bounds in achieving a good number of successful tests and have a relatively mature program. And clearly what's happened over the last few days, and not weeks, indicate a sense of confidence in that their nuclear deterrent is relatively credible, enough for them to go around to cash in on that and to reach out to major powers, including the U.S. and South Korea and China and possibly Japan.
Mark Fitzpatrick in Washington, D.C. President Donald Trump has welcomed the North Korean announcement as a positive step, but his incoming national security advisor, John Bolton, has made an entire career on the notion that you can't believe anything North Korea says. So how can the Trump administration, the U.S., justify today basically giving the benefit of the doubt to North Korea? Should they be satisfied with just a pledge?
You know, I'm happy to see Donald Trump's instincts speaking positively about this development. Of course, it's not verified. Closing down the nuclear test site may just be because of the tired mountain syndrome. They've conducted so many tests there that the mountain can't take anymore and it could collapse. So maybe there's not that much here to hang a hat on, but it's one of what has been a series of positive steps by Kim Jong-un. And I think we have to have some humility that we don't really know exactly what he's thinking, what he intends to do, but applauding it and hoping for more is a good thing. It may not be totally verifiable. And as you said, I think there may well be some tensions between Donald Trump and National Security Advisor John Bolton, who his entire career has been entirely skeptical of diplomacy. and distrustful of North Koreans. So it'll be interesting to see that dynamic play out.
Let me get Robert Kelly's views on that. I saw you smile, Robert, when I mentioned John Bolton's name. How is the Trump administration going to be speaking with one voice on this issue? What is their strategy going to be going forward?
Yeah, well, the Trump administration probably won't speak with one voice. I mean, I think it's pretty well established now after 15 months that the Trump administration is perpetually chaotic. That's one of my big concerns, actually, about the Trump-Kim summit, is that we just don't know what we're going to get. The president's going to go all kinds of conflicting advice. He's going to throw out all kinds of stuff on Twitter. He's not really going to read his briefing notes. We know he doesn't read a great deal. He might just walk in there and who knows what he's going to say. My big concern in terms of sort of Bolton specifically and the Trump administration is that if this thing really goes badly, if it turns into a food fight with Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un exchanging insults the way they did last year on Twitter, Fat Man and Rocket Man and Orange Man or whatever, that Trump is going to walk out of there and John Bolton's going to say to him, look, I told you can't trust these people. I told you the only thing to do with them is hit them. That's my real concern. If this thing fails, it could be a costless belly for Bolton.
Graham, on the Trump-Kim summit, what does Kim Jong-un gain in sitting alongside Donald Trump? Is it worth more than losing a nuclear test site?
Well, to recapitulate on the point about the Punggiri test site, it is run its full course, and there's nothing to really lose in shutting it down or dismantling it. So Kim Jong-un has really lost nothing there in offering it forward to everyone and saying that he's going to put it down. The meeting itself is going to be of immense value to Kim Jong-un. This is a man who is looking for legitimacy, not just internally in the eyes of his own people. He's had to work very hard since he came to power upon his father's demise back in 2010, 2011, to work hard to hold the reins over the country. And he's executed a series of measures to achieve that. He's moved his enemies and adversaries within his administration out of the way. He's put a very strong grip on his government machinery, but he's had to win the confidence and hearts and minds of his people. And in order to fulfill that, that requires him going onto the world stage.
Right.
Leaving
but how does he? I'm curious to know, Graham. How does he justify this changing policy, this shifting policy to his people? As you say, it's a very different policy from his father's. How does he justify it? How does he justify the changing anti-American rhetoric to his people?
Well, if you look closely at the rhetoric, the speeches, even if it's translated into the English language, in terms of what he said since his New Year's speech and so on, there has been very little change or any betrayal of his established sense of mission and objectives for the country. I think by and large we can take it that North Korea's nuclear deterrent is going to be irreversible. I mean, and this is where the sticking point about denuclearization is going to come up. Clearly, North Korea and the rest of the world, or in the least the United States, are on different pages when it comes to what constitutes denuclearization. And I think this is going to be one of the big things to look out for during the summit, how that's going to be worked out. But essentially, coming back to North Korea and Kim Jong-un's messaging to his own people, I don't think he's given up very much. I don't think he's put himself in a position of contradiction in terms of swinging hard one way last year with oodles of tests, and then swinging hard the other way in the first few months of this year, in a sense of what seems to be what some people call an equivalent of glasnost, if anything. So I think he's playing a very careful and very well calculated game, and I think he hasn't compromised at all in terms of what he's trying to achieve.
Okay. Let me bring back Mark in Washington, D.C. Mark, you seem to think that this is a positive step. Now, if North Korea is living up to its side of the bargain, if we see that they are indeed making positive steps in the coming weeks, what then can we expect from the other side, from the Trump administration? They are going to have to make a gesture to North Korea somehow, aren't they? What can we expect? Are we going to see a lifting of sanctions, perhaps?
Well, I think the Trump administration has already made a huge gesture in just agreeing to sit down at the table with Kim Jong-un and give him the status that the other guests have noted he craves so much. But they will want something. There is a belief by some in Washington, including John Bolton, that they're going to get something for nothing. And absolutely they have to give up something. One thing that is in the works is no additional sanctions. I think there's a pretty firm policy by the U.S. government not to relax the current sanctions, but not accelerating is something. Also, no more talk about attacking North Korea. In terms of what North Korea wants, this is a big plus. They're no longer in the crosshairs, and the threat of a U.S. strike would have been very bad for both sides, but disaster for North Korea. So putting that off is a plus. Ultimately, though, the United States will have to do more, and already the idea of a peace treaty is on the table. That's something that Donald Trump has indicated a positive attitude toward, and maybe the biggest benefit for North Korea coming out of these series of summits, both with South Korea and with the United States.
So what are the next steps, and what do we know about North Korea's nuclear arsenal? Its intercontinental ballistic missile, the Hwasong-15, flies at a higher altitude farther than any of its previous missiles. It was last tested in November, and the U.S. mainland was theoretically within range. U.S. officials estimate North Korea has 60 nuclear weapons. Independent experts suggest Pyongyang has enough uranium to produce 6 new nuclear bombs a year. In January 2016, Kim Jong-un announced North Korea's first hydrogen bomb test, but nuclear scientists have questioned that claim. So, Robert Kelly, what happens next? I mean, if they are genuine and serious about peace, North Korea, are they going to open up, these sites for verification? Are they going to become clean about what they have, you think?
Yeah, and that's going to be the big fight, right? I mean, if the North Koreans stop now, that's a good thing, right? It caps them at where they are, right? So it freezes them in place. 10, 15, 20 years from now, we'll all look back and say, if they do this, that was a good thing, right? Because, nuclear weapons, like everything else, become obsolescent over time and need repair and things like that, right? So if they stop, and they genuinely do, that's a good thing going forward. The real question, as you say, is what do we do with the extant program, right? And the missiles are, they seem like they have a lot of them, right? Dozens, if not hundreds. And warheads too, right? The last one was somewhere around 250 to 300 kilotons, which is pretty large. They may have a fusion weapon too. So ultimately, if there's going to be a deal, there's got to be some kind of denuclearization compact. I mean, the North Koreans have got to give on something. Otherwise, a peace treaty is impossible. And, sanctions are be huge pushback from hawks, both in Seoul and Washington, if it looks like the North Koreans are allowed to keep, 50 weapons or something like that. I mean, that's really what the summit's going to be about. The North Koreans are going to try and change the subject to things like economic cooperation and sanctions and everything else. But then the real acid test is, will the North Koreans move on the program? And right now, we just don't know. I mean, there's been a lot of good atmospherics, but not actually a lot of concrete detail from KCNA.
The North Koreans must be aware, as Robert says, Graham, that they have to undergo some sort of verification process. Do you think they will be willing to give access? And if they do give access, who are they going to give it to? Will it be the IAEA or will it be the U.S.?
Yeah, that's going to be that's an important question, and it remains to be seen. I mean, we've seen in the past how the North Koreans couldn't for long endure the scrutiny of IAEA inspectors when North Korea was under the NPT, the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, which it pulled out of eventually. And so one can't really imagine that happening yet. It's clearly a thing that the North Koreans will have to accede to in order to establish that confidence and trust that is doing something tangible in, as Robert Kelly has mentioned, others can mention, capping its current program and making good of efforts towards the tangible denuclearization. But just imagining that's difficult. I mean, having foreign U.S. inspectors or inspectors in the least coming in to scrutinize its facilities in full knowledge of the North Korean public. I mean, that's going to be something that's going to be difficult to square off for Kim Jong-un in terms of the kind of credibility and prestige and respect he's trying to build for his country on the world stage.
Mark Fitzpatrick, your thoughts about this, whether they will give access to the U.S. or to IAEA inspectors. I mean, where do you see this denuclearization process heading if it does happen?
Oh, I think they will give at least partial access. They've done it in the past. There was a time once when the North Koreans allowed a team of American inspectors to go check out an underground facility that the United States suspected was a nuclear plant, and it turned out to be nothing. So they've done that before, and they can do that again. They've had the IAEA in before, and they absolutely have to allow the IAEA back in to at least inspect the declared facilities at Yongbyon, the reactor that had been producing plutonium, the uranium enrichment, the reprocessing facilities. Those have all been declared, and it shouldn't be problematic in terms of public attitudes and so forth in North Korea to allow them in. The problematic thing will be that the United States won't be satisfied with just going to a couple of sites. They'll want to have greater verification throughout the country. And that's not something that North Korea will allow. So in the past, deals have often floundered on the degree of access for verification. And that may well be the case here, that at the beginning, a summit will produce a very positive outcome, but that it'll all fall down in the ensuing months over verification.
What would be the positive outcome for this summit for the U.S.? You talk about the summit. We have no date yet for it. Does the U.S. even have a strategy going into this summit?
Oh, the U.S. definitely has a strategy. They're taking this very, very seriously, and I think we can see that by the fact that CIA Director Mike Pompeo went to Pyongyang and had discussions with Kim Jong-un himself. So the United States definitely has a strategy. They've been careful about stating it. They don't want to raise expectations too high because, the outcome is not going to be anything perfect. It's going to be some degree of promise by North Korea, some process for fulfilling that promise, some early dismantlement by North Korea of the test site, maybe of some of the facilities at Yongbyon, and then a lot to be determined in the months and years ahead.
Okay, Robert, do you agree with that? Do you think the U.S. has a solid strategy going into the summit? I mean, we still don't have a U.S. ambassador to South Korea. Is there a team in place? Do they know what they're getting into?
Yeah, I'm a little bit more skeptical on that, primarily because of the president's own erratic personality. I'm genuinely doubtful that President Trump can actually sit there for several hours and endure a lengthy, complicated discussion about denuclearization. Now, one would normally not expect that, because there'd be a lot of staff work and diplomacy that had taken place before the summit. I mean, summits normally happen after months or years of effort. This thing is flying along. It's going to happen in 6 or 8 weeks or something like that. Again, I mean, maybe it's possible all these things are being hammered out lightning fast, but it seems unlikely given how previous negotiations with North Korea during the agreed framework and the six-party talks went. All that tells me that a lot of things are going to be left unresolved when Trump walks in the room, and who knows what he's going to say. I mean, that's sort of the big question mark. Any other president, I would say, yeah, we can see where this is going to go. There are going to be a bunch of small beer discussions and agreements and stuff like that, and then verification will be the big issue. That's where it has been in the past. But it might also turn out that the president just wanders off the reservation and says all kinds of erratic stuff. I mean,
right.
Just watch him on YouTube. It's
Garham, Ong-Webb in Singapore, your thoughts on this? Where is this headed? The summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, of course, but there is the one coming up next week between the North and South Korean leaders. Do you think, we're headed for better relations between North and South Korea?
Well, in the short to medium term, I think we will. President Moon has been working very hard to make sure that's happened. In fact, I think Kim Jong-un has read the ground extremely well, and at least reading his South Korean counterpart extremely well in terms of how he's basically skipped along and been extremely happy about the overtures from Pyongyang and has reciprocated very quickly. In fact, quite desperately, I would say, in most occasions. And
who do you think, Graham, should be credited with the progress and the concessions that we've seen so far? Is it China? Is it South Korea, the South Korean leader? Or is it the maximum pressure that the Trump administration has applied?
It's really hard to say. I mean, one could always sit on the fence and say all of these things. And these theories are still flying about as to whether or not the maximum pressure effort of strict economic sanctions all around has actually tightened the noose and brought North Korea to its knees. And now it's trying to negotiate. But there's also a lot of countering evidence to suggest that the illicit and illicit trade exchanges between China and North Korea have been also propping up the North Korean regime. So it's pretty hard to say about the maximum pressure argument. I would say that right now, my assessment is that Kim Jong-un has been driving the series of events right from the beginning of this year. And he's been reading the geopolitical ground extremely well. He knows how his players have been reacting or have been going to react. And he's the one who's calling the shots right now. And I think he's the person who gains the most from the summit coming up in late May or June to legitimize North Korea as a normal state.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how things develop. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for an interesting discussion. Robert Kelly, Graham Ong-Webb, and Mark Fitzpatrick, thank you very much for your time. And thank you as well for watching. You can always watch this program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also, of course, join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly, Thibault, and the whole Inside Story team, thank you for watching. Bye for now.